Close your eyes for a moment and picture this. You're walking down a narrow street in Lower Manhattan in the year 1800. The cobblestones beneath your feet are slick with mud, horse manure, and garbage that no one has bothered to collect. The stench is unbearable. Rotting food, sewage, and smoke from coal fires blend into a choking fog. Rats scurry across your path as if they own the place. You hold a cloth over your nose, but it doesn't help. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls. Not for a wedding, not for a celebration, but for another funeral. Because death is never far away in New York of 1800. Welcome to a city of disease, filth, and misery. A city that many dreamed would be the jewel of the new American nation, but which, in truth, was one of the hardest places to survive. This is why it sucked to live in New York in 1800. At the dawn of the 19th century, New York was already the largest city in the young United States. About 60,000 people crowded into Lower Manhattan, with wooden houses packed tightly together and alleyways barely wide enough for a cart to pass. Growth was rapid. Too rapid. There were no systems in place to handle the waste, the water, or the sheer volume of humanity. The city was choking on itself. Imagine waking up each morning not to the smell of coffee, but to the reek of outhouses and open cesspools. Chamber pots were emptied directly into the streets. Rain would wash the filth downhill, but the residue never disappeared. It lingered in the soil, seeped into wells, and crept into the lungs of anyone who dared breathe too deeply. New York in 1800 was not a city of fresh starts. It was a city where you carried the stench of your surroundings everywhere you went. One of the greatest dangers wasn't visible to the eye. It was in the water. Most New Yorkers relied on shallow wells scattered throughout the city. But these wells were often dug dangerously close to cesspools, where human and animal waste was dumped. People drew water from the same ground where their sewage collected. The result? A constant threat of disease. Dysentery, cholera, and typhoid spread quickly through neighborhoods. In the hot summer months, fevers became almost unavoidable. Families lived with the gnawing fear that the simple act of drinking a glass of water could kill them. The city had no aqueduct, no system to bring clean water from upstate. That wouldn't come until 1842, with the Croton Aqueduct. Until then, New Yorkers relied on contaminated wells and private water sellers who hauled barrels through the streets. If you were rich, you might pay for water drawn from a supposedly cleaner source. If you were poor, you had no choice but to drink poison. If you think modern pandemics are frightening, imagine living in New York in 1800, when the word epidemic wasn't a distant fear but a recurring nightmare. The most terrifying of all was yellow fever. Between 1795 and 1805, New York suffered repeated outbreaks. The disease killed thousands and turned entire neighborhoods into ghost towns. When yellow fever struck, the symptoms were horrific. High fever, chills, jaundice that turned your skin yellow, and vomiting black bile. Many died within days. Doctors had no cure, no real understanding of the cause. Some believed it was bad air rising from the docks and swamps. Others thought it came from rotting coffee shipments or foul-smelling garbage. What did the city do? Authorities fled. The wealthy abandoned Manhattan for country estates, leaving the poor trapped among the sick. Entire families died in their homes. At night, carts rolled through the streets to collect bodies. The church bells tolled endlessly, marking yet another death, then another. And the cruelest part? After each outbreak subsided, life went back to normal. People returned, businesses reopened, and the cycle of filth and disease resumed, as if nothing had been learned. If disease didn't get you, fire might. Manhattan in 1800 was a tinderbox. The city was built largely of wood. Wooden homes, wooden taverns, wooden warehouses stacked with hay, pitch, and rum. Open flames lit every home, every workshop, every tavern. A single spark could ignite an inferno. Firefighting was primitive at best. Volunteer brigades rushed with leather buckets, hand pumps, and little coordination. When flames spread, entire blocks could be consumed before they were stopped. The memory of the Great Fire of 1776, which destroyed nearly a quarter of the city during the Revolution, still haunted New Yorkers. And yet, the danger remained ever present. For the poor, a fire meant total ruin. Homes reduced to ash, belongings gone in an instant, no insurance, no safety net. For the wealthy, it was an inconvenience, perhaps a spur to build grander houses uptown, away from the chaos. New York in 1800 was no safe haven. By day, the streets bustled with merchants, sailors, and laborers. By night, they belonged to thieves, pickpockets, and gangs. The waterfront was notorious for crime. Sailors returning from long voyages were easy prey. Drunk, flush with wages, and alone. Taverns doubled as dens of vice, where a man could lose his coin purse, his dignity, and sometimes his life. Law enforcement was minimal. The city had a night watch, but it was small, underpaid, and often corrupt. Officers were as likely to take a bribe as they were to protect a victim. If your property was stolen, chances of recovery were slim. Justice belonged to those who could afford it. Behind the merchant wealth of the port lay crushing poverty. Immigrants from Ireland, Germany, and elsewhere crowded into cheap boarding houses. Families of 6 or more might share a single room, with no ventilation and little light. Children roamed the streets barefoot, scavenging food, working odd jobs, or begging. And let us not forget a darker truth. Slavery still existed in New York in 1800. Though northern states are often remembered as free, New York did not abolish slavery fully until 1827. Enslaved men and women worked in households, on docks, and in small businesses, their lives controlled by others even in a supposedly free city. The contrast was stark. Elegant mansions stood just blocks from squalid tenements. Wealthy merchants dined on imported wines while laborers struggled to afford bread. Inequality wasn't hidden. It was written into every corner of the cityscape. Forget the romantic vision of carriages and cobblestones. New York in 1800 was loud, dirty, and overwhelming. Horses clattered constantly on uneven streets. Vendors shouted their wares from dawn until night. Blacksmith hammers rang out, mingling with the din of sailors, tavern songs, and drunken brawls. The smells were worse. Animal dung, rotting fish from the docks, decaying garbage piled high, and the ever-present stench of human waste. Add to that the smoke from thousands of coal and wood fires, and the air itself became an assault on the senses. If you were a visitor arriving by ship, your first impression of New York was not the Statue of Liberty. She didn't exist yet. It was the smell. A smell so powerful that many travelers wrote about it in letters home. What did all of this mean for the average New Yorker in 1800? Life expectancy was low. Infant mortality was high. Many children never reached their 5th birthday. Women died frequently in childbirth. Men often perished from disease or accidents at work. The idea of growing old was, for most, a distant dream. Work was grueling. Long hours, dangerous conditions, and little pay. Laborers built the city with their bare hands, hauling bricks, cutting timber, loading ships. There were no labor protections, no unions, no safety standards. Injuries were common, and a serious one could leave you destitute. Even daily tasks carried risks. Walking the streets meant dodging carts, avoiding open fires, and steering clear of drunk brawlers. Crossing the harbor in small boats was perilous. Simply surviving each day was a victory. And yet, despite all this misery, people came. Ships arrived daily, carrying immigrants hungry for opportunity. Merchants traded goods from around the world. The port of New York buzzed with activity, laying the foundation for the city's rise as a global hub. Families endured the hardship because they believed in the promise of something greater, a city where fortunes might be made. where freedom might be won, where the next generation might live better than the last. That resilience, that stubborn refusal to give up, is what carried New York forward. Out of the filth and fire of 1800 came the energy, determination, and grit that would eventually build the metropolis we know today. So why did it suck to live in New York in 1800? Because it was a city of filth, disease, and despair. A place where drinking water could kill you, where fire could erase your life in an instant, where poverty crushed families and epidemics stole children from their mothers' arms. But the story doesn't end there. New York did not remain trapped in its misery. Over the decades that followed, the city cleaned its water, built its infrastructure, and began to protect its people. It became a place not just of survival, but of ambition and possibility. Looking back, it's almost impossible to reconcile the New York of 1800 with the New York of today. And yet, the connection is real. The struggles of those who lived through that misery are the foundation of the city's greatness. They endured so that the city could evolve. And perhaps that's the true lesson. Even in the darkest, dirtiest, most hopeless times, the seeds of a brighter future are being planted. New York in 1800 was a nightmare, but it was also the beginning of a dream.